As the Gestapo's chief from 1934, Heydrich made it an instrument of terror. At its peak, it had 45,000 staff, but it fed off a huge network of spies and informers. Propaganda films encouraged citizens to report to the Gestapo the slightest expression of disloyalty to the Reich. Heydrich, as head of the Gestapo, was doing exactly what the Führer wished. In fact, Heydrich was even outshining his boss, Himmler. SS comrades joked, "Himmler's brain is called Heydrich." While the SS carried out his orders, Heydrich found time to enjoy frequent holidays with his wife Lina and their children.
What applied to Heydrich applied to others too. He was like Himmler, like Höss, the commander at the Auschwitz concentration camp. They were caring fathers. People close to them didn't see the cruelty and inhumanity in them.
Utterly convinced that he was in the right, Heydrich was undisturbed by guilt or pity. He maintained his happy family life as he unleashed his relentless campaign of terror across Europe. Gestapo chief Reinhard Heydrich and his wife Lina had 4 happy, healthy children. They often spent summer holidays on the island of Fehmarn. Heydrich used to fly himself there direct from Berlin. He'd work on state papers while his children played around him. But on the 1st of September 1939, he wrote his wife an unexpected farewell letter, invoking the values of the SS.
Bring up our children to believe in Germany's Führer, to be ruthless in obeying the basic laws of the SS, ruthlessly disciplined, kind-hearted to their own people, and merciless towards all enemies, at home and abroad.
War had come to Europe. Heydrich, in spite of his high rank, was determined to see action. He served as a rear gunner in Luftwaffe attacks on Lublin, Poland. "If you constantly decide over life and death," he said, "you must look death in the eyes yourself."
He had no experience of the front, none at all. That was probably the decisive factor in him wanting to go. He wanted to be part of the action and would do anything to get there.
Back from Poland, he soon became even more powerful. In 1939, he was put in charge of the newly created Reich Security Headquarters, which consolidated the SS grip on policing and security. Wielding these new powers, Heydrich had police reserves mobilized for mass murder in Poland. Police Reserve Battalion 102 from Hamburg was among the units under SS control. Its men shot as many as 200 Polish prisoners a day. They were carrying out Heydrich's order to render harmless the entire top-ranking population of Poland. Poland was the prelude to a new dimension of murder. With the outbreak of war, Heydrich couldn't continue the Nazi policy of expelling Jews. The Soviet Union was to be the testing ground for his new approach to the so-called Jewish question. In May 1941, in the Saxon castle of Prech, Heydrich informed top-ranking SS officers of a sinister new mission. Men like Otto Ohlendorf were to lead SS death squads to liquidate the Jews of the Soviet Union. Heydrich warned him the mass murder would be a tough job. Within a month, 4 Einsatzgruppen, or task forces, were ready. Under Heydrich's overall command, they included members of the Gestapo, the secret police, the Waffen-SS, and other police officers.
We were always told we would be sent to the front if it was necessary. We were told that we would be securing areas behind the lines, for example against partisans, ferreting out soldiers of the Red Army who had lost contact with their units, and so on.
Heydrich and his SS top brass knew differently. He cold-bloodedly advised his commanders, "Be ruthless where you have to be ruthless."
For me and for my fellow soldiers, it was an enormous turning point in our attitude. We found it so difficult to comprehend. Until then, we had thought that such mass extermination was only ever perpetrated by the communists. And now it was suddenly the cultured German nation that was practicing it.
In July 1941, in the sand dunes of Libau in Latvia, the true purpose of the Einsatzgruppen was revealed.
There were a couple of hundred of us, and suddenly the order was given. All men out. My father began to cry. He kissed me, gave me his wristwatch. He knew it was the end.
All men fit for military service were rounded up.
I saw how they were killed. I was only 100, 150 meters away from the spot. We had a forest track. That's where we kept our vehicle, you see. And from there we could see everything.
By the end of 1941, the 3,000 men from Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen had personally shot 300,000 to 400,000 Jews. They included Fanny Segal's father.
I took his coat and went to the prison. There was a policeman there. I said, "Look, my father was brought here yesterday. Do me a favor and give my father his coat. His name is Mergowitz." He said, "Little girl, when was your father taken?" I said, "Yesterday at around 5 o'clock. He said, "Girl, go home. Your father doesn't need his coat anymore."
In Berlin, the public were being entertained by some of the murderer's colleagues. At least 2 people in the audience knew just what was happening in the East. Like his boss Himmler, Reinhard Heydrich kept himself fully informed of the killings and was plotting the next response to the so-called Jewish problem. When fighting intensified on the Russian front in summer 1941, Heydrich took to the skies once more. Shot down, he was missing for 2 days, but survived. Hitler and Himmler banned him from flying in combat ever again.
He was ordered not to fly because they needed him. They didn't want him to be killed in a crash or to fall into enemy hands if his plane was shot down. That would have left no one at the helm.
With his unrivaled expertise in organizing mass murder, Heydrich was the man Hitler had chosen to complete the extermination of the Jews. Heydrich was to organize the deportation of all European Jewry to the death camps in the East, a task he undertook with relish. In January 1942, he chaired a top-secret meeting in a villa on the Wannsee Lake. He'd summoned senior Nazis there to discuss the so-called final solution. The group openly discussed mass murder. Heydrich announced that it was time to annihilate all of Europe's Jews. As part of the final solution to the Jewish question in Europe, he told them, around 11 million Jews come into the equation.
Heydrich was a prototype, an example of a generation defined by absolutes. And by that I mean there are no longer any humane limits. Nothing is impossible. Millions of human beings can be killed.
Heydrich prided himself on having the inner strength to do the unthinkable. Only I can do it, he said. The others cannot. Faced with innocent victims, Heydrich spoke of the duty to be ruthless. He expected his men to be unflinching in their duty.
An enemy of the Nazi Party, an opponent of its ideology, needs to be eliminated. That was it. And in the view of the party, this was a difficult task, but a good deed.
In September 1941, Hitler appointed Heydrich Deputy Reich Protector in charge of Bohemia and Moravia in former Czechoslovakia. His task was to crush all Czech resistance. By the manner of his arrival, he intended to show that the SS were now the masters of Prague.
Heydrich's major policy, as you know very well, was complete Germanization of the Czech populations. In other words, it would be another German state.
Lena Heydrich was intoxicated by the power her husband enjoyed.
I am swayed by sublime feelings. I am no longer a human being. I am a princess and live in a fairy tale land.
Heydrich set up Theresienstadt, a so-called retirement camp for elderly Czech and German Jews. It became a transit camp for victims of the Holocaust en route to the death factories in the east. Bohemia and Moravia soon felt the full force of SS tyranny. Heydrich's Gestapo inspired fear and terror. Heydrich encouraged Czech workers with special rewards, inciting them to make weapons for Hitler's war machine. And on the face of it, this tactic paid off.
At no point were the Czechs on Heydrich's side, but they were happy to let Heydrich buy them. That is something else. They were happy to accept because they had to. They worked in heavy industry. They were actually the armourers for Germany, and they were better paid, better rewarded, and better treated because of it. But that's not to say that they were at all happy about it, or that their feelings changed. That's two completely different things. Opportunism does not mean that you accept the enemy's point of view just because you serve him in order to get something.
Heydrich would call his subjects "my Czechs," seeming to believe he was safe and even popular. Secure in his castle rooms, he could tyrannize his protectorate and oversee the Holocaust in the East. At Prague Cathedral, in the chapel of St. Wenceslas, Heydrich formally accepted the surrender of the keys to the Czech royal treasure. This symbolized the total subjugation of his new kingdom. But Czech resistance wasn't broken, as signs of V for victory over the Nazis showed.
Heydrich did not succeed in breaking our resistance. We continued to fight against the Nazis. Yes, there were many fatalities, but we communists and nationalists in the Czech resistance did not give up. We wanted to defend our land against the Nazis with all our might.
In Operation Reinhard, named after Heydrich, 2 million Polish Jews were exterminated in the death camps. But Heydrich's plans did not end with the extermination of Europe's Jews. He had also proposed the murder of many millions of Slavs as the final phase of his so-called racial purification of Europe.
The plans were in place. If Germany had defeated the Soviet Union, around 90 million Slavs would have been under the control of the Nazis. Of these, 14 million would have been needed as working slaves. Around 30 million were going to be killed. The rest were to be sent over the Ural Mountains into the wilderness of Siberia. All that is personified in Reinhard Heydrich. I am utterly convinced that he would never have hesitated for 1 second, not a single second, to make these unthinkable plans a reality.
To his family, Reinhard Heydrich was a caring father and loving husband. But he will go down in history as the man who masterminded the murder of millions. without any remorse. His father's work, Reinhardt's Crime, had been aptly named.